a new role for themselves. In a statement released in the last few
Behind a sealed palace door, with no cameras waiting and no band playing outside the gates, King Charles read a private request that turned an already fragile family rift into something far more dangerous. It was not merely a plea for reconciliation. It was not simply a question of whether Meghan could move a little closer to royal life again. Buried inside the wording was a phrase so explosive, so emotionally loaded, and so institutionally reckless that Charles stopped reading, removed his glasses, and asked in a voice far quieter than anger, who had allowed this to reach his desk. Britain had expected an ordinary summer briefing. Instead, the monarchy found itself staring at a crisis built around one name it could never handle lightly: Diana. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss a single update, because this story is not only about a title. It is about memory, succession, power, family pain, and the one wound inside the House of Windsor that never fully healed. The request was short. That made it worse. There was no long explanation to soften the meaning, no careful legal fog to hide the ambition. Meghan was asking for a controlled path back into the royal orbit through selective appearances, renewed security discussions, access to Windsor for family and ceremonial purposes, and public recognition of what she described as her continuation of Diana's humanitarian legacy. But near the top of the document was the phrase that changed everything: Diana's royal successor. Charles did not react like a man hearing a clumsy suggestion. He reacted like a sovereign hearing a line had been crossed. A sovereign is not simply a king in a decorative sense. The sovereign is the legal and symbolic head of the institution, the living center of continuity. And in that moment, Charles understood that this was not a request for healing. It was a challenge over who had the right to stand near Diana's memory, and under what authority. That mattered because Diana was never just a former Princess of Wales inside the royal story. She became something far larger than rank. She became emotion in human form. She became grief, glamour, rebellion, tenderness, heartbreak, and accusation all at once. To the country, she was a public memory. To William and Harry, she was their mother. To Charles, she was the most painful chapter of his life, permanently tied to regret and judgment. To Meghan, according to those close to the situation, Diana represented something else entirely, a woman crushed by the system, yet beloved by the people, and therefore proof that survival outside palace approval could create a different kind of power. Charles read the phrase again. Then he placed the document flat on the table and said the words that froze the room. That title will not enter this family. No one answered immediately. The silence deepened. The king's private secretary looked down. An equerry near the door remained still. Charles stood at the end of the long table with the paper before him and understood, in an instant, that this could not be treated as an emotional misunderstanding. If he allowed the phrase to stand even in private negotiation, it would travel, it would leak, it would spread from whispers to headlines. And once Diana's name became part of a modern royal bargain over access, security, appearances, and influence, the monarchy would be dragged into a contest it could not control. He wanted facts. Had Harry approved the wording? Had Meghan chosen it alone? Had any palace intermediary softened earlier objections? Had someone inside the wider royal network encouraged the idea that Diana's symbolic space could be used as a route back into relevance? Those questions mattered because internal encouragement would mean something worse than family tension. It would mean institutional weakness. And the monarchy could survive scandal, criticism, even temporary unpopularity. But it could not survive confusion over where emotional symbolism ended and royal authority began. Before any response could be prepared, a copy was quietly sent to Prince William. He was due in another meeting when the folder reached him. He opened it without expectation, read the first paragraph, and then reached the phrase, Diana's royal successor. Those 3 words changed his expression at once. He dismissed the aide, closed the folder, and remained alone in his office for several minutes. Charles had reacted as king. William reacted as son. That difference would shape everything that followed. The country often sees royal conflict as a matter of rank and public statements. But inside palace life, the deeper battles are usually about memory. Who speaks for the past? Who guards it? Who benefits from it? Who is accused of misusing it? William had spent most of his adult life carrying his mother's memory in public while trying to protect it in private. He had tolerated documentaries, anniversaries, public tributes, charity references, and endless comparisons. But this was not tribute. This was symbolic inheritance. And symbolic inheritance, once accepted, becomes power. He called his father at once. Charles took the call standing by a window overlooking the palace courtyard. He expected anger from William. He had not expected the colder thing that arrived instead. William told him that if the phrase had been written exactly as reported, then the issue was no longer about a family request. It was about someone attempting to establish a moral claim to Diana's place in the modern monarchy. Charles listened in silence. Then William said something that settled the matter further. "You must answer as king. I will answer as her son." Inside another residence, Harry was being pulled toward the same storm from the opposite direction. He understood better than anyone why Meghan felt drawn toward Diana's image. He had long believed that the same mechanisms that once isolated his mother had later closed around his wife. Scrutiny, suspicion, distortion, intrusion, emotional fatigue. He had said as much for years, but he also knew something Meghan did not fully grasp. For William, Diana was not a symbol available for interpretation. She was sacred ground. Shared suffering might create comparison. It would not create permission. Camilla, informed in cautious terms that a serious family matter had reopened around Diana's legacy, gave Charles an early warning. "Do not answer this in fury," she told him, "because if you do, you will make the title more powerful than it already is." Charles heard the advice, but his anger remained. Not loud anger, worse than that, the kind that becomes disciplined. But to understand why that phrase struck so hard, it is necessary to go back. The decision was not born that morning. The request that reached the king was only the final form of a much older argument, one that had started months earlier during a closed planning discussion about a future Diana-linked charitable initiative. The story did not begin with a dramatic document. It began with an idea presented as healing. Meghan had been exploring the possibility of participating, in some limited way, in a project associated with causes Diana had once made central to her public identity: homelessness, children in distress, emotional well-being, and human vulnerability in the face of institutional coldness. On the surface, it sounded almost impossible to reject. Service, compassion, memory, reconciliation. Yet the palace understood immediately that such a proposal was not simple. A memorial initiative is never just a program. It is a gate. Once a figure is allowed to stand beside a legacy as beloved as Diana's, that figure gains moral brightness no official title can easily match. The planning meeting at Kensington Palace was deliberately small, no cameras, no formal minutes distributed beyond those required for record. Only a few senior household figures, one legal advisor, two charity coordinators, and members of the inner family team connected to William. Meghan believed the proposal would at least open a conversation. William believed the proposal itself was the problem. A senior courtier began reading from a briefing note, describing Meghan's possible role as a modern continuation of Diana's compassionate mission. He did not finish the sentence. William stopped him with one hand pressed flat against the table. No one raised their voice, but the temperature of the room changed immediately. William said, with controlled clarity, that Diana would not become a transferable position. Not for Meghan. Not for Catherine. Not for anyone. She was his mother before she was a public brand, and no living member of the family would be described as her successor. Meghan felt the refusal as humiliation disguised as principle. She had not asked for Diana's title in a legal sense. She had not demanded formal inheritance of rank. In her mind, she had asked for recognition that the same public wounds could produce a similar moral authority. She believed the palace wanted Diana's image frozen in a form it could curate, not carried forward by anyone it could not control. William believed precisely the opposite. He believed that once comparison turned into designation, grief would become currency. The meeting ended without resolution, yet the real damage was done afterward, in the interpretations each side carried away. Meghan told Harry that the family feared her connection to Diana because people would understand it instinctively. Harry, torn between empathy and alarm, did not fully reject that view. William, meanwhile, concluded that the issue could no longer be handled casually. If language that suggestive had entered a formal meeting once, it would appear again. And if it appeared again in writing, it would eventually become a negotiation tool. That was when Charles quietly approved a private restriction. The instruction was not theatrical. No announcement was made. No leak was encouraged. It was simply circulated among the relevant household channels, legal teams, communications staff, and senior private offices. Certain phrases were to be considered forbidden in any official or quasi-official discussion involving Meghan, Harry, family reintegration, memorial activities, or public description. Among them were Diana's successor, Diana's heir, the new Diana, and any ceremonial wording implying inheritance of her emotional or public position. A palace restriction sounds abstract, but in royal life these things matter enormously. Ceremonial language does not merely decorate the institution, it defines boundaries. It decides who stands where, who may be described how, and which symbols can attach themselves to power. Once language enters the record, it becomes harder to contain. Charles understood that. William demanded it. The restriction went into effect. And now, months later, Meghan had used precisely the one phrase the king had personally forbidden. By late afternoon, the atmosphere across the palace had changed completely. The official household, meaning the staff and offices that support the sovereign and organize the functioning of royal life, began operating on quiet emergency footing. Charles wanted a tracing report of the document's route. William wanted assurance that no charity contact or ceremonial planner had encouraged the wording. Communications advisors wanted to know whether the phrase had already escaped the room. Security staff were told to prepare for the possibility of an unscheduled arrival, protest activity, or press concentration near palace residences if the matter leaked. Then Meghan requested to explain herself directly. Charles could have refused. Perhaps part of him wanted to. But refusal carried its own danger. If he declined even to hear her, the story could later be framed as proof that the palace never allowed conversation. So a restricted private meeting was approved. Restricted meant exactly what it sounded like. No promise of progress, no ceremonial welcome, no media relevance, and no assumption that discussion meant legitimacy. Meghan entered composed. That unsettled Charles more than tears would have. She was not pleading, she was prepared. The document sat on the table between them like evidence in a trial no one had admitted was taking place. Charles asked the question directly. Why did you use a title that had already been forbidden? Meghan did not retreat behind confusion. She said the phrase reflected lived reality. She said she had endured the same kind of hostility, isolation, distortion, and abandonment that once surrounded Diana. She said she was not claiming to become Diana. She was asserting continuity of struggle and purpose. Charles stared at her for a long moment before answering. You do not inherit her place because you suffered here, he said. Meghan replied that suffering was exactly what connected the two stories, and that the institution's refusal to admit this was part of the same old pattern. She accused the monarchy of defending form while failing women. She said every challenge to palace control was called manipulation the moment it threatened the preferred narrative. She said if Diana had been alive, she would have understood why this language mattered. That sentence cut deeply. Charles leaned forward and asked whether this was truly about service or whether it was about entry, Windsor, appearances, security, relevance. He said the phrase had turned memory into leverage. Meghan answered that the palace had turned memory into a locked gate and was punishing anyone who approached it without permission. No one shouted. That made it worse. The king pushed the paper back toward her and said that no official pathway, public role, or negotiated return could be built upon Diana's name in that way. Meghan, to her credit or to her miscalculation, did not withdraw the phrase. Instead, she revealed something even more serious. A public-facing version of the proposal had already been prepared in case private discussions failed. If the palace refused, she said, the broader moral argument would still remain. Charles felt the last of his patience disappear. A formal response, he warned, would follow any public use of the phrase. A formal response is not merely a press reaction. It is the sovereign's institutional answer, drafted with precision and carried across the machinery of the crown. It clarifies standing. It shuts doors, it leaves marks. Charles stood, closed the folder, and declared the meeting over. Then Meghan stepped into the corridor. William was waiting. He had come without advisors, without briefing papers, without performance. That gave the moment its force. The future king was not there to negotiate on behalf of protocol. He was there because Diana's eldest son could not permit silence to be misread as consent. Meghan saw him and stopped. For a few seconds, neither moved. It was one of those royal moments no camera ever captures, yet somehow defines everything that follows. William spoke first. He said he would support no arrangement, private or public, that placed Meghan anywhere near a claim to his mother's symbolic identity, not through charities, not through language, not through appearances, not through comparison disguised as compassion. He said that pain could create sympathy, But sympathy was not succession. Meghan answered that he did not own grief. He did not own the right to recognize familiar patterns of cruelty. He did not own Diana's message. William replied that he was not trying to own her message. He was trying to stop it from being used as a route back into royal standing. Shared wounds, he said, did not create a transferable legacy. He had expected resistance. He had not expected her refusal to yield even then. That was the moment William made his private decision. If the phrase had already entered strategic planning once and written negotiation later, then the matter could no longer be treated as misunderstanding. It had to be structurally blocked. Within hours, he ordered a review of every charity contact, foundation description, speech draft, and project outline in which Meghan's name might be placed in conceptual proximity to Diana for institutional or public purposes. That sounds technical. It was brutal. In palace terms, reviews are how doors close quietly. Invitations disappear, descriptions change, access narrows, ambiguity ends. Charles moved in parallel. He authorized a palace directive stating that Meghan held no ceremonial, constitutional, representative, or symbolic continuation of any role associated with Diana. Ceremonial meant public symbolism. Constitutional meant formal standing within the machinery of the state. Representative meant acting in the crown's name. Symbolic was included precisely because that had become the battlefield. The wording mattered because the palace was no longer merely rejecting a phrase. It was defining the perimeter of memory itself. The Lord Chamberlain's office was pulled in. The Lord Chamberlain oversees major elements of royal household organization and ceremonial administration. Legal advisors reviewed whether any future event description could imply association. Security teams were instructed that no potential family meeting, visit, or private contact was to be interpreted as re-entry into working royal life. A working royal is a family member carrying out official duties on behalf of the crown. Charles was making sure that no photograph, no arrival, no corridor exchange, and no charitable scene could later be framed as restoration. Meanwhile, Harry was trying to hold together two truths that were tearing each other apart. He loved Meghan. He believed she had suffered. He believed the family had often failed to understand how deeply. But he also knew William was not defending protocol alone. He was defending a wound. And there are some wounds inside royal families that speak more loudly than rank. Harry saw where this was going. If Meghan pushed publicly, Charles would answer as monarch and William would answer as son, and there would be no middle ground left. When Meghan returned and told him how the meeting with Charles had ended, he listened without interruption. When she described William's corridor confrontation, he closed his eyes briefly. He did not need more detail. He knew exactly what that meant. She wanted support, immediate and complete. He hesitated. That hesitation changed the room. To Meghan, it felt like betrayal. To Harry, it felt like the first honest second in years. He told her that comparison to Diana had always carried risk. He said there was a difference between seeing echoes of his mother's suffering and naming someone her successor. Meghan asked why that distinction mattered only now. He answered with painful simplicity. Because now it is being used to negotiate power. Outside those rooms, the leak began. No one knew precisely which fragment escaped first. A phrase passed to a commentator. A line hinted to a columnist. A briefing summary seen by someone too eager or too wounded to keep it contained. But once Diana's name and Meghan's request appeared in the same whisper, the story became unstoppable. Broadcasters interrupted regular programming. Palace correspondents shifted from speculation to urgency. Newspaper editors smelled blood and memory at once, the most combustible combination in royal coverage. The public reaction was immediate because the argument was instantly understandable. Not everyone knew the internal rules of succession or ceremonial description. Everyone understood that Diana's name was not ordinary territory. Some voices defended Meghan. They said she was being punished for speaking a truth the palace could not bear. They argued that the institution still feared women who turned public pain into moral independence. Others reacted with fury, saying no one had the right to place themselves in line behind Diana's memory as if it were a role available for claim. The nation was not debating a technicality, it was debating reverence. Then came the images. Flowers appeared outside Kensington Palace. White roses, handwritten notes. One message, repeated across evening broadcasts, carried 5 words that settled like a verdict over the whole crisis. Let her be remembered, not replaced. William saw that coverage from a private sitting room and felt no satisfaction. That was the cruelest part. He had wanted to prevent exactly this spectacle. Yet in defending his mother from symbolic appropriation, he had watched Diana's image once again become the center of public conflict. The country saw a line being protected. Inside the family, the truth was more painful. Every act of protection reopened the loss. Charles, under pressure from some advisors to issue a harsher public statement, refused. He had been furious at first. He remained resolved. But vengeance would only deepen Harry's humiliation and feed the narrative Meghan feared most. So when he learned through internal briefing that a public announcement using the title had been drafted but not yet released, he made one final calculation. If the phrase were withdrawn privately, he would close the matter without a public annihilation. That left the final decision inside one marriage. Late that evening, after the calls had ended and the advisors were gone, Harry placed the prepared statement on the table between himself and Meghan. No staff, no palace, no commentators, no strategy. Just the words and what they had done. He told her that he could not defend the release. Meghan stared at him in disbelief. For years he had supported the parallels, reinforced them, spoken of them openly. He answered that parallels were one thing, titles were another. Diana's symbolic place in public memory was not an office that could pass from one woman to another. He said he had spent too much of his life watching his mother's name turned into argument, and he could not let it become the center of one more war. The silence after that was almost unbearable. Meghan asked if royal pressure still governed his choices no matter how far away they lived. Harry said no, the opposite. For the first time he was choosing not to repeat the pattern. Supporting her, he said, had to mean building a future, not proving every present wound by returning to his mother's tragedy. He said that if they kept measuring every conflict against Diana's life, they would remain trapped inside a story they claimed they wanted to escape. Those words hurt because they carried truth. Meghan looked at the top page again. Diana's royal successor. She had used the phrase because she believed it named something emotionally real, something the palace wanted buried. But now she could see that whatever power the phrase carried came at a terrible cost. It did not open a door, it summoned a battlefield. Slowly, she tore the first page in half. Harry did not move at once. Then he reached across the table and held her hand as the tension in the room shifted from combat to grief. Meghan admitted something she had resisted even to herself. Part of her wanted the return not just for service, not just for recognition, but to prove that leaving had not erased her importance. Harry answered with his own confession. Every time Diana's name was invoked, he felt both protected and imprisoned by it. He could not lose his mother again in public argument. The statement was withdrawn, but by then the damage could not be reversed. The idea existed. The headlines were alive. The palace had acted. The country had chosen sides. All that remained was for the monarchy to decide how the story would end. Charles ended it with paper, not spectacle. He signed a short resolution closing Meghan's request in full. No restored role. No public appearances under negotiated symbolism. No Windsor-based ceremonial inclusion. No security review linked to representational duties. No future discussion in which Diana's name could be used to support status, access, or re-entry. A resolution, in palace terms, is not emotional language. It is administrative finality. It tells offices what exists no longer as a possibility. Yet even in that hardness, Charles made one choice that revealed the father beneath the king. He ordered that the palace would not publicly humiliate Meghan for withdrawing the phrase, and would not issue additional language that trapped Harry in fresh shame before the nation. Private family contact, he said, could remain private family contact, but it would remain entirely separate from institution, ceremony, privilege, or symbolic inheritance. William received the resolution without visible celebration. That too mattered. This was not victory in any joyful sense. It was a boundary secured at emotional cost. He had protected his mother from becoming something assignable. But in doing so, he had also confirmed how fragile the family remained. The future king understood a painful truth. Preparation and protection sometimes look cruel from the outside, even when they are the only way to keep the center from collapsing. Catherine, informed in careful terms as the matter concluded, reportedly understood the deeper meaning at once. The future of the monarchy was not being shaped only by laws of succession or the health of the king. It was being shaped by how the family handled memory. Succession means the legal order by which the crown passes, but the future of a monarchy also depends on emotional legitimacy, the public sense that those closest to the institution know what must never be traded. Catherine saw that the burden ahead would not only be public duty, it would be carrying history without exploiting it. The final symbolic scene came 2 days later, not in a dramatic broadcast, but in a quiet appearance the cameras almost missed. Charles and William arrived side by side for a previously scheduled royal engagement linked to community service. No one mentioned Meghan. No one mentioned the document. No one mentioned Diana. Yet the image said everything. The present king and the future king, walking together with solemn restraint, not because every wound had healed, but because the institution had chosen continuity over confusion. Charles looked older that day. William looked harder. The distance between them had not vanished, but they understood that some crises leave no space for theatrical reconciliation. Only alignment, only duty, only the shared knowledge that if the monarchy blurred the line between love and leverage, it would lose both. Elsewhere, far from the palace, Meghan faced the truth left behind by the torn page. The phrase had given voice to a feeling she believed was real, but feelings, however powerful, cannot always be crowned with legitimacy. Some names are too sacred, too wounded, too burdened by history to be used as pathways. Harry remained beside her, yet changed. He had defended her against hostility. He had not abandoned her, but he had finally drawn one line in the ashes of everything else. His mother's memory would not become an instrument, even for the person he loved most. And that is why this story matters far beyond one rejected request. This was not merely a disagreement over wording. It was a national lesson in the difference between empathy and entitlement, between comparison and succession, between tribute and claim. The monarchy could survive criticism. It could survive personal bitterness. It could survive family estrangement. But it could not survive allowing the most emotionally powerful figure in its modern history to become a negotiable title in a contemporary struggle for access and validation. The truth was more painful because everyone lost something. Charles defended Diana's memory, but at the cost of pushing Harry further into sorrow. William protected his mother, but in doing so had to reopen the grief he has spent years carrying with controlled dignity. Harry protected his marriage for years, yet learned that love does not remove every boundary history imposes. Meghan tried to reclaim importance through meaning, only to discover that meaning tied to another woman's suffering can never fully belong to the one who invokes it. And Britain, watching from outside the gates as ever, was reminded once again that royal crises are never only constitutional. They are human, they are intimate. They are built from paper, silence, memory, and the terrible weight of symbols. In the end, the monarchy chose preparation over denial. It chose clarity over ambiguity. It chose to say, without fanfare but with unmistakable force, that the future could be planned, the family could remain fractured, and still some boundaries must never be crossed. Love and duty could no longer remain in the same form they once were. Private pain could no longer be allowed to rewrite public meaning. And Diana, perhaps more than anyone else in the royal story, would remain exactly what she had become long ago, unforgettable, untransferable, and beyond inheritance. The page was torn, the request was closed, the gates did not reopen, and the final truth settled over Buckingham Palace like evening rain. Titles can pass, roles can change, reputations can rise and fall. But some memories are not crowns to be claimed. They are burdens to be carried with reverence, or not touched at all. Thanks for watching. Please do not forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.